Hello and welcome to Did I Tell You the Story podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Padilla, and I am so excited to be back for another day, another episode, another story that we're going to tell, another story that we're going to talk about. So, today's episode is about honoring God and just finding honor in God and in His eyes. But before we get into it, I want to pray, like always, like I always do. So, let's pray. So, Jesus, thank you for letting us come here today and for just letting us listen to your voice and listen to your word and to just listen to you speak, God, because I know that when I talk, it's not just me talking. You are using my voice and you are using my personality to speak through me, God. And I just pray that the words that you have to say today may be edifying and that they may touch someone who's watching or listening now or in the next few months or in next year, that just someone feels touched or that someone feels that you answer someone's calling through this episode, God. Um, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your power. Thank you for your beauty. Thank you for just being intimate with us and having intimacy with us and communion and letting us come to you. And thank you for letting us have the freedom of and the ability to be able to talk about you to other people on a platform such as this. And Jesus, I thank you for all that you do and for how amazing you are and just for your goodness and for everything that you have done and everything that you're going to do. I pray that you bless this episode, that it may be a blessing to others, and that it may just be you speaking, not me. Because you know that if I speak, we're going to go off the rails. And so may you just, I just pray that this may be the story that you want, the story that you have set. So thank you, Jesus. In your amazing name we pray. Amen. So, like I said, today's episode is about honoring God and about finding honor in God's eyes. I had a story when I was preparing all of this. I had a story in my head about this. And as I was preparing it, I was like, I don't want to talk about the story, but at the same time, I was like, I want to talk about the story, but I just don't know what to talk about it. And so then Jesus was like, what about honor? Like, this story is perfectly surrounded and made by this person finding honor in God's eyes. And so today we're going to talk about that. And you're probably like, Michi, what does that mean? Because I myself was like, what does that mean? So, finding honor in God's eyes, finding honor in the eyes of God, is basically aligning yourself with God's will and His values. By doing that, you're demonstrating respect and obedience to Him, which ultimately reflects God's glory in your life. So, when you find honor in God's eyes, it's because you're doing what is right in His eyes, which is what is right always, but you are doing everything according to His will and according to His plan, and you're being obedient and you are being respectful to Him, and because of that, He finds you honorable. And it has to do a lot with humility. It has to do a lot with surrender and just being humble. So I have like three stories that I want to talk about today. So bear with me. Once again, we're going to be in the Bible because this podcast revolves around the Bible and the Word of God. And I'm never going to have an episode that doesn't have at least one Bible verse in it. So today we have three stories. It's going to be long. So be excited. Okay, so today the first one we're going to talk about is the story of Esther. And this is the story that I was like, I really want to talk about this, but like, do I just read the story? Like, I had no idea what to talk about with the story until Jesus brought it all together. So yeah, the story of Esther. For those of you who don't know and have never read the story of Esther, Esther is a book in the Bible. It's before the book of Job in the Bible. I don't think chronologically, no, but like in the Bible, that's the order. And it's one of my favorite Bible stories. And it is such a nice story. There's a Veggie Tales episode, I think, that is about the story of Esther. Obviously, they like infantilize it and they make it more childish because there's aspects of the story that a child shouldn't be reading, but it's an amazing story and I love it. And we're going to get into it today. And so basically, I'm not going to start off in the first chapter because the first chapter, I'm just going to summarize it. So basically, there's a king. So these are the Israelites, right? But they are living under the rule of the Persians. The Persians came after the Babylonians. So the Babylonians conquered Israel, took them as slaves. That's when Nebuchadnezzar was a whole thing. And then after Babylon came, I think the Persians conquering Babylon. And so then they took the Israelites that were already there as slaves. So this is Persia. The king is Persian. His name is King Xerxes, which I'm pretty sure Xerxes just means um king, or what's his name? His actual name in Hebrew was Ahasuerus. Um, but I don't know how to say that, so we're just gonna go with Xerxes because that's what it says here. So there's King Xerxes, and he was the king. He reigned from India to Ethiopia. Like he reigned over all of that. It says here 127 provinces, and he lived in Susa. So that's where his royal throne was. The capital, in a sense, was in Susa. And basically, it says in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials, and he invited like all the military people from all the provinces. This king Xerxes had a queen called Queen Vashti. Basically, he is drunk with all these military men and people, and he calls for Queen Vashti to come and show off her beauty to all these people. Now, as a woman, if a man calls me and says, "Hey, come to the room where my friends and I are all drunk, because I want you to just start dancing and show you off," I'm going to say no. And that is exactly what Queen Vashti did because she knew her worth. And who knows? Like, these people were bad. Like, these were bad people. The Persians were bad people. All these people, they had no fear of God. So they were like horrible. So who knows what Xerxes had been doing to her previously, whether he had been abusing her or anything, that she was like done with him and she's just like, no, I'm not gonna do it. And who knows if that had happened before and she just felt really uncomfortable. So she said no. And she's like, I'm not doing it. Um and basically she says no, and he gets super angry. He gets furious and he's like, she's not my queen anymore, basically. And he like kicks her out. She's not the queen because she refused to appear before the king. And the whole thing is like, yeah, she's his wife, she's his queen, but if the king doesn't call you, you can't appear before the king. And if the king calls you, you have to appear before the king. Like, there is no way, like, you can't just show up unless he calls you. And if he calls you, you can't just say no. So her saying no was a complete abomination to all of this, and it was something that probably like had never been done before. So he gets super angry, and I think his eunuchs, his helpers and people around him suggested, they were like, why don't you basically hold like a pageant and with all the women in Persia with all the women it says, write a decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It shall order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. And so he sent letters to all the parts of the empire, all the provinces, in its own script and its own language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. Okay, so then chapter 2, it says, but after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put this plan into effect. And so basically here, like they're like, why don't we just look for someone who will be appealing to you? Which just reminds me of a book series, where it was kind of like the same thing, where like the prince needed a queen, so he sent out not a decree, but kind of to get like all the women, and he just like basically found like which one he liked. So this is kind of like the same idea as that. And then it says in verse 5 in chapter 2, at that time there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with King Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Hegai's care. Hegai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. Every day, Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. That evening, she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning, she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives lived. There, she would be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Esther was a daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. Even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions just as she did when she lived in his home. So I'm going to stop here. There's a few things I want to say, and then I'm going to kind of continue. So Esther is a young girl. She's a virgin. They call her part of everyone else. She's Jewish, but she hid it from everyone. She hid it from the king. She hid it from the eunuchs. She hid it from everyone who was around her. Because just as Christians are hated nowadays, sometimes, and in places like in China or in India, they're they have to hide. It was the same here. Like they were literally hated. And so she kept her beliefs and her religion and her nationality a secret, per Mordecai's request. So you see this girl who she's coming out of her household. She doesn't have to listen to Mordecai anymore because she's being married off to the king. And yet she's still obeying him and still being respectful to him. One thing that I wanted to mention, her name in her Persian name was Esther, her Jewish name was Hadassah. Esther means star. Hadassah means myrtle. I think that's how you say it, myrtle. And basically, in like a prophetic sense, the myrtle would replace the briars and thorns of the desert, which depicts the Lord's forgiveness. And so I point this out because when you read the rest of the story of Esther, you see how God used her to gain the king, for the king to give the Jewish people forgiveness. And so I thought that was very interesting. And I also wanted to read Psalms very quickly. Psalm 75, 6 to 7. So I'm gonna, Psalm 75. I almost did 65. Psalm 75, 6 to 7. And it says, for no one on earth from east or west or even from the wilderness should raise a defiant fist. It is God alone who judges. He decides who will rise and who will fall. And so when I was reading this part, that verse was brought to my mind because here you see Esther is placed in the palace as the queen because of a decision that the king took. The king was evil. His queen, because he had many wives and he had many concubines, but he had one queen, and his queen, Vashti, went against him. And in his anger and in his rage, he kicked her out. He banished her. And even though that was the madness of man, God used that to bring Esther to the palace. And then we see the outcome of Esther in the palace, which is in God's perfect plan. And although God isn't mentioned in this book, the name of God is not mentioned once in this book, we still see the hand of God throughout it all, which is why I love it so much too, because you see his hand in the chaos and you see his perfect hand in the whole story, that you don't even have to like mention his name because you know that it's him and it could only be him that's doing all of this. But anyways, to continue, chapter 3. So basically Mordecai is placed as a palace official. Chapter 3, it says, sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect, because as a Jew, he's not going to bow down to someone that's not God. So then, verse 3, it says, then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why are you disobeying the king's command? They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. Goodness gracious, Haman. Okay. Continuing, it says, so in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence. To determine the best day and month to take action. And the day selected was March 7th, nearly a year later. Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, there is a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it pleases the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administrators to be deposited in the royal treasury. So, manipulation. Anyways, the king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said, the money and the people are both yours to do with as you see fit. So on April 17th, the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Haman dictated. It was sent to the king's highest officers, the governors of the respective provinces, and the nobles of each province in their own script and languages. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. A copy of this decree was to be issued as a law in every province and proclaimed to all peoples, so that they would be ready to do their duty on the appointed day. At the king's command, the decree went out by swift messengers, and it was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa fell into confusion. All right, so then here we have Haman, who is so incredibly evil that just because one Jewish man wouldn't bow down to him, he decides that it's okay to kill a whole nation of people, to kill everyone. And he goes to the king, and something that stands out to me is his verbiage. And he goes to the king and says, if it pleases the king, issue a decree. Like, if you wish. But really, he's just manipulating the guy. And he's like, I'm going to give you 10,000 bags of silver, all for the royal. Like, really? Anyways. And, I forgot to mention before. Sorry. I forgot to mention before. Mordecai was at the gate before all this happened. And he heard two guards plotting to assassinate the king. Mordecai hears, he tells Esther tells the king and tells the king that Mordecai was the one who heard. So then they go and arrest these people. I'm saying this because this is going to be important for what comes next. Anyways, kind of going to summarize some of it, but not all of it. Next, Mordecai goes and requests for Esther's help. He learns everything that has happened, and he hears that obviously, like, he and his people are going to be killed. And he says he goes to the palace gate, and Esther's maids and eunuchs come and tell her, like, what was going on with Mordecai's distress. And so then she sends someone to go find Mordecai. They bring him in, And basically, Mordecai gives this guy or this girl, what is it? Okay. So Mordecai gives the eunuch that Esther sent a copy of the decree to give to Esther. He shows it to Esther and explains the situation. And he also told the eunuch to tell Esther to go to the king and beg him for mercy for her people. So the eunuch tells Esther. Esther tells the eunuch to go back to Mordecai and tell him that all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So it's been a month that the king hasn't called for her. And she's like, "You're asking me to go to him and beg for mercy for my people when I could die just by showing up. Like, I want, there's a way, there's a, what's the word? There's a possibility that I won't be even able to even utter the plead for mercy. He can kill me first." But then Mordecai sends this reply back and he says, "Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this?" And so then Esther tells Mordecai, "Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. Even then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die." I love what Mordecai says, where he tells her, he's like, "Don't keep quiet during a time like this when you could die." He's like, even if you don't open your mouth and say something, the help is going to come from another place, which is the trust that he has in God. He's like, you don't have to do it. I know the help will come either way. But who knows if the reason that you are in the palace as queen is because of this? Who knows if God placed you there because of this? And so she's like, "You're right. I'm going to fast. I'm going to pray. We're going to figure out what we're going to do." And she's like, "And if I have to die, meaning if I show up to the king's uh courts and he kills me, then he kills me. But maybe I was made for this." And so in chapter 5 it says, "On the third day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes and entered the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne facing the entrance. When he saw the queen standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out the gold scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. Then the king asked her, 'What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom.' So, like, whatever you want, I'll give it to you." And then Esther says, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for the king." The king returned to his attendants and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet, as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me, what do you really want? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what all this is about." So basically, she's like, "Okay, come to a banquet." And then she's like, "Tomorrow I want you to come back." So then it says in verse 9, Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet, but when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh his wife, and boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. He bragged about the honors the king had given him and how he had been promoted over all the nobles and the officials. Then Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us, and she has invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow." Then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate." So Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends suggested, "Set up a sharpened pole that stands 70 feet tall, and in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king." This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. Little does Haman know. So basically, this next part, okay, so this next part, kind of gonna summarize. Basically, the king was having like nightmares. He wasn't sleeping well, and he asked his attendant to bring the history of his reign so that he could read it to him. Kind of like a bedtime story. And in those records, he is reminded of that Mordecai was the one who had exposed the plot to assassinate him. So then he's like, "What reward did we give Mordecai as a recognition for saving my life?" And they're like, "Nothing." And he's like, "Well, this can't be so." So he asks, "Who's in the outer court?" And it just so happened to be Haman. And so he says, "Bring him in." And so he asks, he goes, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied, "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with the royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and the horse be handed over to oh, I already said that. And let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes, and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, 'This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor.'" So then the king goes, "Awesome. Go and do this to Mordecai," basically. And so Haman goes and places the ropes on Mordecai. He places him on the horse, and he led him through the square, telling him, saying, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." And after Mordecai is returned to the palace gate, Haman is humiliated. He goes back home, and he's like, "What in the world?" Like, he goes to complain to his wife and his friends, and he's like, just super angry. But they tell him, and while they were talking and they're talking about like planning to kill him, they come and say, "Hey, the banquet is ready." So they go. And it says in chapter 7, "So the king and Haman went to the Queen Esther's banquet. On this second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, 'Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom.' Queen Esther replied, 'If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, but that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king.' 'Who would do such a thing?' King Xerxes demanded. 'Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?' Esther replied, 'The wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy.' Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out to the palace. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 70 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination." "Then impale Haman on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set out for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So Haman intended to kill Mordecai, intended to kill all the Jews, but Esther had found so much favor in the king that even though he himself had made the decree to find out that his queen and his queen's people were going to be murdered, he's like, no. And so the story continues, and basically, the king makes a decree to help the Jews. Um, they have a festival of Purim, and in the end of everything, Mordecai becomes prime minister so he was second in command after the king, and he was very great among the Jews, and he still continued to do good work for his people and to speak up for the welfare of their descendants. And so here we have the story of Esther, the story of a young woman who, I think, when she was going to see if she could be the king's wife, the last thing she thought would be that she would be the queen. And when she became the queen, I think the last thing she thought was that God was going to use her and her position to bring victory to her people. And I think of something like she said, she's like, "I can't go before the king. He can kill me." Yet she still knew, she was like, "My God is over all of this." And she obeyed Mordecai. And in obeying Mordecai, she was obeying God. And also, in order for this whole story to work, there's a reason that Esther had favor in the eyes of every single person from the beginning. From the first eunuch, the first harem, she found great favor in him. And then she found great favor in the king. And because of that, God orchestrated all of that so that she could bring victory to her own people, because God knew what was going to happen. God knew that they were going to be slaughtered, murdered, and annihilated, and all that. And he wasn't going to let that happen because those are his people, and God saves his people. And so the verse where I talked in Psalm where it says God appoints and God can take people off, God appointed Esther for that perfect moment. And like Mordecai says, like, who knows if you were meant to be queen for such a time as this? Like, there's a perfect plan in everything that God orchestrates, that we don't know the behind the scenes of it all. The only one who knows the behind the scenes of it all is God, because he is the one planning everything. We just have to live our life in obedience to God and in humility. And in doing that, we are going to be moved where God wants us to move. And that's the only way that we are going to be able to live his will out. And in doing so, we find favor not only in the eyes of other people that God allows us to find favor in, but in his eyes too. And he honors that, and he loves that, and he delights in your obedience and in your respect and in your humility. And so, another story that I was thinking of that brings that is someone who found, I guess, favor, or who found honor in the eyes of God is Samuel. And so we have the prophet Samuel. But the story specifically is when he was a kid. So basically, for a little background story, Samuel is the son of a woman named Hannah. Hannah was barren, she could not have kids, and she, made a prayer so that she could have a son because she couldn't have a son. And she told God, she was like, if you let me have a son, I will dedicate him to you and to your house. And so she ends up having a son. She names him Samuel, which means I asked the Lord for him because she did. She asked him and he answered. And she gives a whole shout of praise. And it's amazing and it's beautiful. And so then it says, so she gives Samuel to the prophet, priest? Yeah. The priest Eli. He she gives him to him to basically live under him in the house of the Lord in the temple. Eli had sons. They were very wicked, and I'm not going to go throughout the whole story. But in verse 18 of 1 Samuel chapter 2, it says, But Samuel, though he was only a boy, served the Lord. He wore a linen garment like that of a priest. And it continues, and Eli's sons were horrible, but Samuel was not. And it says in verse 26, and it says, meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew taller and grew in favor with the Lord and with the people. So there's these two boys who are doing really bad stuff, and Eli knew that the Lord was going to put them to death. So Eli knew that they were going to die. But Samuel, who was under the care of Eli, had found favor in the eyes of the Lord and favor in the eyes of everyone around them. And so then in chapter 3, and I love this, it says, meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli. Now in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare and visions were quite uncommon. One night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. Suddenly, the Lord called out, Samuel. Yes, Samuel replied, what is it? He got up and ran to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? I didn't call you, Eli replied. Go back to bed. So he did. Then the Lord called out again, Samuel. Again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? I didn't call you, my son, Eli said. Go back to bed. Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he had never had a message from the Lord before. So the Lord called a third time, and one more time Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, Go and lie down again. And if someone calls again, say, Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Samuel went back to bed. And the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, Speak, your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, I am about to do a shocking thing in Israel. I am going to carry out all my threats against Eli and his family from beginning to end. I have warned him that judgment is coming upon his family forever because his sons are blaspheming God, and he hasn't disciplined them. So I have vowed the sins of Eli and his sons will never be forgiven by sacrifices or offerings. And so then it says, Samuel stayed in bed until morning, then got up and opened the doors of the tabernacle as usual. He was afraid to tell Eli what the Lord had said to him, but Eli called out to him and said, Samuel, my son. Here I am, Samuel replied. What did the Lord say to you? Tell me everything, and may God strike you and even kill you if you hide anything from me. So Samuel told Eli everything. He didn't hold anything back. "It is the Lord's will," Eli replied. "Let him do what he thinks best." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and everything Samuel said proved to be reliable. And all Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh and gave messages to Samuel there at the tabernacle. And Samuel's words went out to all the people of Israel. So Samuel is interesting to me. Obviously, he has two books, First Samuel and Second Samuel. And we know that Samuel is the prophet who anoints Saul. And he's the prophet who anoints David and who tells Saul that the Spirit of the Lord has left him because of his sins. But what strikes me is like how young he was and how God still called him at such a young age to do such a hard thing and to warn his people. And I think about his mom, and I think about how she, in her faith, she went and asked God for that child. And once she had that child, she knew that that child was from God. And before even having her child, she dedicated him unto him. And, I think about my story sometimes. When I was born, I was told that I was never going to be able to walk. And, I was a little baby girl. And for my parents, hearing that and hearing like your daughter, first child in the family, well, not in the family, but like their first child, and being told like she's not gonna be able to walk ever, and she's a little baby, and we need to do surgery on her to maybe give her some mobility in her legs. That's hard, and that's not easy to hear. And my parents both prayed a lot for God to heal me. And my mom told God, if you heal her, I will dedicate her to you unto dance. Because obviously, if I couldn't walk, I wouldn't be able to have the ability to dance. And God healed me. And I walked and I ran, and now here I am, alive and breathing and walking and dancing and jumping and running. And to me, dance, I love to dance. I'm I'm Hispanic. I love to dance. It's in my blood. But for me, my dance is the highest form of worship that I can give to God. And it is the biggest form of praise that I can give him. It's when I dance during worship and I have my fans and I'm dancing with my fans in my hands and I'm moving around, there is not one moment that I don't have a smile on my face because I feel the smile of the Lord upon me. And every time when I walk, I'm not reminded of what the Lord healed me from. When I run, I'm not reminded of what the Lord healed me from. But when I dance, I'm reminded of what the Lord healed me from. And I'm reminded of his goodness and his grace and his mercy and just how good he is. That because of my parents' faith, he healed me and now I can dance. And so I think about Samuel and I think about his mom Hannah because of Hannah's faith of saying, I'm going to dedicate my son to you. She had like, I think it was after the first year or after she circumcised him, she left her sons in the hand of Eli. And yes, she was in communication with him because that's her son. But like, that's hard for a mother to drop her son off at someone else's house so that he could learn about the things of the Lord. But that's what she requested from God. And God gave her a son. And she could now see the fruits of all of that. And I think it's so beautiful when you're a parent who prayed over your child before they were even born and asking God to find favor in them and to do certain things with them, and then you see them grow up and you see those things occur and happen. I'm not a parent, but just imagining that is the greatest joy I think anyone could ever have. I think about my parents and I think about the things that they have told my brother and I, of things that they have prayed over us before we were born or when we were little, that they say that they see those fruits happening and they see us living out those prayers that they prayed. I think that's the most beautiful thing ever. And so here we have Samuel, who's a young boy who always found favor in the eyes of God. So much so that God chose him and appointed him as a prophet for a really long time, from a young age to death, to bring warning upon his people. So I think that's really cool. And the last story, there's many stories of people in the Bible that God found favor in and God found honor in. They found honor in the eyes of God, like Noah, even David himself, and just so many other people. But the last one that I want to talk about specifically was Joseph, because love the story of Joseph. And his story is an interesting one. So in Genesis chapter 37, it says, "So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended he often tended to his father's flocks. He worked for his half brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things that his brothers were doing. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. "Listen to this dream," he said. "We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be our king, do you? You actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. "Listen, I have another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers. But his father scolded him. "What kind of dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what his dreams meant. So, um, so basically after this, his brothers were, I think, tending the sheep. And so Jacob tells Joseph, like, go and meet them. And in verse 18, it says, "When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. 'Here comes the dreamer,' they said. 'Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams.' But when Reuben had heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. 'Let's not kill him,' he said. 'Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him.' Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then he grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. Then Just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, which I think what's his name? Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. So crazy. Um, and the traders took him to Egypt. Sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message: "Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" Their father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was a captain of the palace guard. So then, next to, okay, chapter 39, it says, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. Um, and so then Potiphar's wife is very um risky, and she tries to have Joseph to sleep with her. Joseph is like, "No." He runs away, but when he runs, I think she grasps on to his robe, and so then she makes a whole big deal, and she's like, "He's tried to sleep with me, and he's tried to do this thing with me," and it's like a whole thing. And so Potiphar becomes furious. He believes his wife, obviously because it's his wife, and thinks that Joseph has tried to um what's the word? Violate his wife. And so he takes Joseph and he throws him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And but I love what verse 21 says. It says, "But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed." Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them into the prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. While they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them, and they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took a cluster of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." "This is what the dream means," Joseph said. "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as his chief cupbearer. And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the first dream such a positive interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I had a dream too. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white pastries stacked on my head. The top basket contained all kinds of pastries for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head." "This is what the dream means," Joseph told him. "The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole. Then birds will come and peck away at your flesh." Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker to join the other officials. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position, so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. But then it continues, and in chapter 41 it says, 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. So 2 years later, after Joseph interpreted these people's dreams, this happens. So Pharaoh dreams that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the river bank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. But he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, while well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams, so he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he told Pharaoh. "Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and in the prison who was each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant, and everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. And after he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it." "It is beyond my power to do this," Joseph replied. "But God can tell you what it means, so and set you at ease." So the Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams, and then Joseph responds to both dreams. and he says, first, Pharaoh says, I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance of what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man to put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it there and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine comes to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy this land. And so Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a higher rank than yours. And so Joseph, who was sold to slavery by his brothers, who was then put into prison by Potiphar, who had been there for 2 years or more, is now elevated to the position second to the king. So he's in charge of everyone except the king, basically. So then all this happens. Um, anyways, so all this happens. Okay, so all this happens. Pharaoh appoints him. Joseph gets married. It says he was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. As predicted, for 7 years, the land produced bumper crops. During those years, he gathered everything, and then, after, he has kids. He names one of his kids Manasseh, which means God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. And then his other kid, Ephraim, which means God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief. And then, the famine starts. And in chapter 42, it says, so basically all the people from around Egypt came to Egypt to buy the grain from Joseph because there was a famine throughout the whole world. So then in chapter 42, it says, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die. So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain, but Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them, for fear some harm might come to him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Since Joseph was a governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where are you from? He demanded. From the land of Canaan, they replied. We have come to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. And he remembered the dreams he had about them many years before. He said to them, you are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become. No, my lord, they exclaimed. Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," Joseph insisted. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "Sir," they said, "there are actually 12 of us. We, your servants, are all brothers, son of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us." But Joseph insisted, "As I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true. By the life of Pharaoh, if it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies." Then Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "I am a God-fearing man. If you do as I say, you will live. If you really are honest men, choose one of your brothers to remain in prison. The rest of you may go home with grain for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me. This will prove that you are telling the truth and you will not die." To this they agreed. So they said, "Clearly we're being punished by what we did to Joseph a long time ago. That's why we're in this trouble." And then Reuben goes, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against him, but you wouldn't listen? Now we have to answer for his blood." Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. Um, so he turned away from them and began to weep. When he regained his composure, he spoke to them again. Then he chose Simeon from among them and had him tied up right before their eyes. So Joseph tells his servants to fill the men's sacks with grain, but he also gave secret instructions to return each brother's payment at the top of his sack. He also gave them supplies for their journeys home. So the brothers loaded their donkeys with the grain and headed for home. And so then they're like trembling because they find the money. They go to Jacob and they're like, "He accuses us of being spies. We need to take Benjamin with us." And Jacob is like, "No, you can't take him." But they're like, "Let us." In the end, he's like, "Yes, okay." Um, so yeah, they go. After a long time, it continues to rage. That's when finally Jacob is like, "Okay, you can take Benjamin." They go back and they go to Joseph. So then it says, um, in verse 15 of chapter 43, it says, "So the men packed Jacob's gifts and doubled the money and headed off with Benjamin. They finally arrived in Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the manager of his household, 'These men will eat with me this noon. Take them inside the palace, then go slaughter an animal and prepare a big feast.' So the man did as Joseph told him and took them into Joseph's palace. The brothers were terrified when they saw that they were being taken into Joseph's house. 'It's because of the money someone put in our sacks last time we were here,' they said. 'He plans to pretend that we stole it. Then he will seize us, make us slaves, and take our donkeys.'" In verse 19, it says, "The brothers approached the manager of Joseph's household and spoke to him at the entrance to the palace. 'Sir,' they said, 'we come to Egypt once before to buy food. But as we were returning home, we stopped for the night and opened our sacks. Then we discovered that each man's money, the exact amount paid, was in the top of his sack. Here it is. We have brought it back with us. We also have additional money to buy more food. We have no idea who put our money in the sacks.' 'Relax. Don't be afraid,' the household manager told them. 'Your God, the God of your father, must have put this treasure into your sacks. I know I received your payment.' Then he released Simeon and brought him out to them. So they go, they have a whole meal. Joseph's just asking about his father, if he was good. I mean, if he was alive. They're like, yes, he's alive. And so they all eat and drink, and everything happens. Anyways, chapter 44, it says, when his brothers were ready to leave, Joseph gave these instructions to the palace manager: "Fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's money back into his sack. Then put my personal silver cup at the top of the youngest brother's sack, along with his money, the money for his grain." So they do this. They start chasing after them, saying, "What have you done with our master's silver cup? You stole it." They're like, "What are you talking about? We would never do that." And then they find it in his sack, in Benjamin's sack. And so Joseph is like, what have you done? Don't you know that I can predict the future? They're like, let us stay. And he's like, no, only the one who has stolen my cup will stay and be my slave. The rest of you can go. So then Judah stops and Judah says, um, don't, like, please don't do this. Give him our son. And then he says, do you have a father or a brother? And they said, yes, we have a father who is an old man. And so then he says, bring him here so I can see him with my own eyes. Um, so basically, they keep going back and forth, and it's a whole thing. Finally, in chapter 45, it says, Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out, all of you. So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. Please come close, he said to them. So they came closer. He said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset. And don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. The famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here and not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of this entire palace, and the governor of all of Egypt. And so basically, he tells them, go back and to bring Jacob. And the story continues. But what I wanted to highlight is what Joseph said at the end, where he's like, don't be angry with yourselves because you weren't the ones who put me here. God used you guys and used your hatred towards me to bring me here, to appoint me here, so that I could then be put in Potiphar's house. That would then lead me to the prison where I would meet the cupbearer and the baker, and I could interpret their dreams for them through the power of God. For then, when the Pharaoh had dreams, the cupbearer remembered. So then he could interpret the Pharaoh's dreams, which would then help him find favor in Pharaoh's eyes, which he would appoint him as second in command over all, to then save the world and try to preserve as many people as he could and his own family so that they wouldn't die because Joseph prepared everything. So in the story, like, God had a plan, a perfect plan, and he used his brother's wickedness to get Joseph there. And it's just like in the story of Esther, God used the king's wickedness and madness to get Esther there so that she could save her people. And the same way now, he used Joseph's brother's wickedness to put Joseph in the palace to save their people. And so the one thing I kind of wanted to highlight is just like this is not something that is limited to the people in the Bible. This is not something limited to the people, to these characters of the Bible. We too can find honor in God's eyes. We too can be placed in certain places to honor God and to glorify his names, because all these stories in the end, what they do is they don't bring glory to them, they bring glory to God. Because you see all these people, they're like, even Pharaoh, he's like, there is no one else in this land like you who has the spirit of God like you do. And the king said the same thing, and with Samuel it was the same thing. And so this is not limited to them. We too can be placed in hard situations that maybe we think, because of the wickedness of the people around us, we have been led to that and led to that point, but we are not. That's not how it works. God uses everything for good. God uses what Satan meant for evil for his good. There's a song by Brandon Lake, which I don't remember right now what it's called, but it says, "What the devil meant for bad, God meant for good." And that song has been playing in my head right now when I was saying this, because the devil can try to have any form of attack against your life. He can try to make you sad and take you out of a place of comfort and of happiness and put you somewhere where you are uncomfortable, where you think this is the worst place ever. But God uses that. God knows what's going to happen. God knows everything that's going to happen, and He uses it for His own goodness and for His perfect plan. And in the end, it's all to bring glory to His name. And so, how do you find honor in God's eyes? By being obedient to Him, by being respectful to Him, by being humble. You see, Joseph was so humble. Everything he's like, I do this not by the power in me, but by the power of God in me. He's like, I don't have power. God has a power. And because God has a power and He lives in me, I can do that. And so, if you've asked yourself before, like, how do I find favor in the eyes of God? How do I find honor in the eyes of God? It's just being obedient and being humble and loving what He loves and doing what He wants you to do. And in that, you're going to find favor in His eyes and He's going to delight in you. And so, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. For a little bye bye announcements, this is a long one. How long have I been talking for? Like an hour? A little bit more than an hour. I hope you loved hearing me yap about God because that is my favorite thing to talk about. But yeah, for a little bye-bye announcements, as always, you can check the song for the episode, which is gonna be the Brandon Lake one that I just said. I just don't remember what it's called, but it's gonna be that one. You can check it out and listen to it in the description. I don't know if anyone ever does listen to it, but I love music and I love songs. And to me, everything is always connected to a song. And honestly, if you did your Bible study before, if you're gonna do it after, or even anything, just like it's over and you're still and you're driving or you're on a walk and you want to listen to something else, put the song on and just meditate on the words and talk to God. I like doing my Bible studies with music, so if you want to add all the songs that I put to a playlist and then have a Bible study, like have it for your Bible study, that's awesome. I think I'll probably do that someday. I don't know. But yeah, the song is gonna be there. My Instagram and my TikTok is gonna be there, like always. Like I always say, on TikTok, I put the clips of this. So if you want to see, if you're listening, you want to see me in person and see what I look like, check out the clips or go to YouTube and check it out. Or if you're on YouTube, I just, to promote the episodes that are coming up and stuff. On Instagram, I put more things, like more announcements on the story and things that reminded me of what I'm talking about that other people maybe have posted and things like that. Just keep in touch through there, check it out because since the schedule is a little bit more wonky, you can keep up with when things are going to come out there instead of just be waiting. But if you don't have Instagram or don't have TikTok, don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, the channel, and follow the show on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, so that you can get the notification when the next episodes come out. If you like this episode, comment. I think you can comment on Spotify, you can comment on YouTube. I love to hear what these episodes are doing to you, how God is speaking to you. It's lovely to hear. Um, and share it with your friends and your family so that we can continue to get God's word out there and we can continue to just have people hear his word from a different perspective. So, yeah. What else do I have to say? Do I have to say anything else? I don't think so. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I certainly enjoyed sharing it, and I'm excited for what's to come. So, yeah, I love you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.